The last light of a short winter day faded over the Great Plains. In a sheltered valley, a circle of tipis stood quiet and strong against the snowy landscape. Tall cottonwood trees bordered the frozen river nearby, their bare branches rattling softly in the evening breeze. Here, in the forested lowlands, the camp was safe from the fiercest prairie winds and close to precious firewood for the cold nights. A pale pink glow lingered on the horizon for a moment before night fell completely, bringing a deeper chill. One by one, stars appeared in the vast dome of sky as a Lakota family prepared for night inside their buffalo hide lodge. Within their teepee, the air was tinged with the aroma of wood smoke and dried sage. Red Hawk, the father of the family, pushed aside the hide door flap and stepped in from the cold twilight. A gust of frosty air followed him, but he quickly let the heavy door skin drop shut behind him. In his gloved hands, he carried a bundle of firewood, twisted sticks of willow and cottonwood gathered earlier from the grove. Wood was scarce on the open plains, so the band had wisely chosen this winter campsite for its trees and natural windbreaks. Red Hawk stamped snow from his moccasins and smiled at the scene inside the lodge. His wife, Bluebird, knelt by the central fire pit, coaxing a small flame to life. She had arranged a teepee of kindling over the coals from the daytime fire, gently blowing until orange sparks danced upward. A thin spiral of smoke trailed towards the smoke flaps overhead as the new fire crackled. In the orange glow, the interior of the teepee slowly came into view. The cone of wooden poles curving to a smoke hole at the top, the walls lined with buffalo hides, and the floor carpeted with cedar boughs and dry grass under several buffalo robes. Their home was a little world of warmth and light amid the darkness and cold outside. Bluebird looked up and greeted her husband softly as he placed the firewood at her side. He added a couple of logs to the small fire, and the flames grew brighter, illuminating the painted designs on the teepee's inner lining. The lodge covering itself was made from over a dozen cured buffalo hides, sewn together with sinew. Along the lower walls hung an extra layer of hide and cloth, an inner teepee liner that helped insulate the space in winter and keep out drafts. As the fire crackled, Red Hawk felt its gentle heat on his face and gave a satisfied nod. Despite the bitter cold outside, their teepee was built to hold warmth well. The thick buffalo hide walls blocked the wind, and the conical shape helped retain the heat from the central fire. With the door flap secured and the smoke flaps adjusted just right, the lodge would soon be snug and comfortable, a haven of warmth amid the freezing night. In one corner of the teepee, Little Flower, their young daughter of about 5 winters, was helping her grandmother White Feather unroll the family's bedding. Little Flower's breath puffed in, tiny clouds in the cold spots of the lodge as she eagerly spread out a large buffalo robe on the ground. White Feather, wrapped in a rabbit fur shawl, smiled at the child's enthusiasm. Together they laid out layers of soft furs and blankets on top of the cedar boughs that covered the earthen floor. Under the bottom robe, they had already placed a thick layer of dried prairie grass collected in the autumn. This grass mattress provided insulation and cushioning, keeping the sleeping area off the cold ground. On top, buffalo hide blankets would provide exceptional warmth. The heavy winter hides still had their dense fur, making them as warm as any modern comforter. Little Flower ran a small hand over the shaggy buffalo robe. Its scent of smoked hide and animal fur was familiar and comforting to her. "Is this my bed for tonight, grandmother?" she asked softly. Whitefeather chuckled gently, her lined face catching the firelight. "Hang, yes, this will be our bed," she replied. In truth, the whole family would sleep together on these robes, using each other's warmth as much as the blankets. The grandmother showed little Flower how to tuck the edges of the furs to keep out drafts. Though the temperature outside was far below freezing, inside here the family would soon be toasty under multiple buffalo skins and deer hides. Red Hawk joined them, placing another thick robe at the ready. He knew well that a single buffalo robe could be amazingly warm, thick bison fur and leather that held heat efficiently. Early white travelers had noted how a buffalo hide blanket could keep a person warm even in sub-zero cold. The Lakota and other plains peoples had relied on such hides for generations, and tonight would be no different. As he arranged the bedding, Red Hawk ran a hand along the teepee's inner lining. The family had added this lining for the winter, hanging spare hides and an old canvas trade cloth around the interior about shoulder height up from the ground. This liner created an insulating dead air space between it and the outer wall, helping trap warmth and keep out the low drafts. It also funneled the airflow so that the draft of the fire would carry smoke upward effectively. Red Hawk remembered his father's teaching on how to set up the winter teepee. "Hang the lining when the leaves fall. It will keep the frost from creeping under the lodge wall." He was grateful for that knowledge passed down, for he could already feel the difference. Below the liner, the air was still and growing warm, while above it, he could see wisps of smoke being drawn up and out the smoke hole as intended. Bluebird tended the fire carefully, feeding it gradually with sticks of wood and a few dried buffalo chips. Earlier in the season, when the band was camped on the open prairie where trees were few, they had collected buffalo dung to use as fuel. Those dried buffalo chips burned with a steady glow and little flame, but they produced almost no sparks, which was a blessing inside a teepee filled with flammable hides and bedding. Now, here by the timber, they had wood to burn, but she still liked to add buffalo chips to keep a slow, constant heat without sudden flaring. A small pile of the flat, dried dung pieces sat near the fire pit, alongside twists of sagebrush and the willow logs. Bluebird placed a buffalo chip onto the fire and watched it begin to smolder red, giving off a faint, earthy smell. It would act like a charcoal, adding warmth through the night and helping keep the fire alive. The fire's light grew steady and filled the conical space. The family's few possessions could be seen neatly arranged around the lodge walls. There were rolled blankets, skin bags with food, a bundle of dried herbs, and some weapons, Red Hawk's bow and quiver and a lance, propped beside his shield near the door. From the lodge poles overhead hung more items, a parfleche container with winter stores of dried meat, some strips of smoked buffalo jerky, and a pair of snowshoes. A child's doll made of leather and beads lay near Little Flower's sleeping area, and the glint of beads could be seen on clothing pieces hanging from pegs on the poles. Each object was quietly bathed in the flickering amber light. Outside, the wind began to pick up, skimming over the treetops with a low howl. The walls of the teepee shivered ever so slightly as a gust passed. A dusting of snow that had settled on the top was dislodged and drifted down, a few flakes slipping in through the smoke hole. One or two cold crystals landed on Little Flower's nose as she looked upward in wonder. She giggled and wiped them off, then crawled closer to the fire where her mother was now stirring a pot of stew suspended over the flames. The warmth near the fire was intense enough that she felt hot on the side facing the flames, while her back still felt the chill of the air behind her. She turned periodically, knowing the trick that all plains people learned, to warm oneself evenly by turning like a spit in front of the fire. Bluebird gently admonished her daughter. "Not too close, or you'll get sparks on your blanket." Little Flower shuffled back a bit. Sparks were actually less of a worry at the moment. Thanks to the buffalo chips, the fire's heart was glowing coals and gentle flame, but one never could be too cautious. A flying ember could burn a hole in their precious buffalo hide cover or robes. Many old tipis bore tiny star-like burn holes from campfires past. Tonight, though, Bluebird was keeping the fire small and steady. Red Hawk crouched by the doorway, lifting the edge of the hide door flap to peer out. The sky was fully dark now, moonless and scattered with countless stars. A rush of cold air invaded again, and the fire flared and danced in response. Satisfied that no major wind was coming directly into the door, he closed the flap tightly and placed a wooden pin through a loop to fasten it. Then he adjusted the two smoke flap poles from inside, angling the flaps at the top of the teepee so that the rising smoke would be drawn out on the leeward side. His motions were sure and practiced. Even Little Flower knew that a well-managed smoke hole was important. Without it, smoke would build up and sting their eyes. Yet if it were left too open in a storm, snow and wind could come swirling down inside. Tonight the breeze was gentle, so Red Hawk left a hand's width gap for ventilation and allowed a bit of the night sky to be seen through the top. If she looked up, Little Flower could spot a couple of twinkling stars through that vent, like tiny blessings watching over them. She pointed one out. "Grandmother, look, a star!" Whitefeather followed the child's gaze and nodded. "Yes, perhaps that is the North Star winking at you through the smoke hole," she said. In their traditions, stars were indeed like relatives in the sky. Whitefeather told her granddaughter, "That star has guided our people for a long time. It reminds us that even in the dark, cold night, we are never lost." Little Flower smiled sleepily and nestled against her grandmother. The warmth of the fire was spreading through the lodge now. The layers of hides, the liner, and the careful draft management were proving effective. The teepee felt like a cozy den, while outside the temperature kept dropping. Red Hawk could hear the distant call of a coyote from the hills, but it was faint. Closer by, he heard only the crackle of the fire and the rustle of his family moving quietly. As the night firmly settled in, the family gathered around the fire to share a simple hot meal. The grandmother ladled out the stew Bluebird had warmed, a broth filled with dried corn, prairie turnips, and bits of bison meat that had been dried and stored after the autumn hunt. It wasn't a feast, but it was hearty and warm. Little Flower cupped her wooden bowl in her hands, letting the heat soak into her fingers. They all murmured words of thanks. Pilamaya, gratitude to the Creator and the spirits of the animals and plants that provided their food. Before they ate, Red Hawk offered a small portion of the stew to the flames, an old custom of Thanksgiving. The flames sizzled as a few drops hit, and a fragrant steam rose briefly. In his heart, and quietly on his lips, Red Hawk prayed, Wakang Thanka, Great Spirit, thank you for this food, for this shelter, and for my family. Watch over us this night. The others remained respectfully silent during his prayer, each in their own way sharing the sentiment. Little Flower took a bite of the stew. It tasted rich and smoky. As she ate, she could feel her body warming from the inside out. Bluebird had also given her a strip of dried meat to chew on, a little treat, and the girl contentedly gnawed on the tough, flavorful jerky. Despite the darkness and cold beyond their lodge, she felt safe and loved here, next to her mother and grandmother. Halfway through the meal, Little Flower paused and looked toward her father. In her small voice, she asked, Ata, how do we stay warm here? The cold can't get us? The worry behind her innocent question was clear enough. Outside was a deadly winter, yet they were expected to stay warm and survive night after night. Red Hawk smiled at his daughter, and he glanced around the teepee. He decided to show her just how their home protected them. We will be warm, Changte Shicha. Dear one, he reassured her. He pointed to the buffalo hides that made up the teepee cover and liner. See these hides? They are thick and strong, the buffalo's gift to us. They keep out the wind and hold our fire's heat inside. In winter, we put extra hides as lining on the walls, so the cold air cannot sneak in. And our fire here, he gestured at the glowing coals and little flames. Our fire is like the heart of the lodge. It gives us warmth and light. The smoke goes out the top through the flaps, but the good warm air stays mostly down here with us. Bluebird added, we have the buffalo robes to cover us too. One buffalo robe alone can keep a person from freezing, even if it's snowing. We have many, and we will all sleep close. She reached out and pulled Little Flower's fur blanket around her shoulders. Also, we have each other. When family sleeps together, our warmth is shared. You'll be between me and Grandma. You won't even feel a little cold toe. Whitefeather chuckled. Hogang, that's true. And remember, your father set up our lodge here among the trees. The worst wind will go over us. It's much colder on the open plain, but we are smart. We chose this place because the old ones taught us to find shelter. She took a moment to toss another piece of wood on the fire. Our people have lived through countless winters like this. We know what we're doing, little one. The Great Spirit and the spirits of the buffalo, the cedar, the willow, all help us too by giving us these gifts to survive. Red Hawk nodded. We won't freeze. This teepee may seem thin to you, but it's very cleverly made. It is one of the best shelters in the world. Even in blizzards, it will stand if we take care. He recalled hearing from a visitor once that even soldiers admired how warm and secure teepees were. He didn't mention to his daughter the few times in his life a lodge did collapse in an extreme gale. Those were rare events when a peg pulled out or a pole snapped. Instead, he confidently patted the nearest lodge pole. These poles and hides are our strong house. We trust them. Satisfied with these answers, Little Flower grinned and returned to eating her stew. Indeed, the warmth inside had grown so comfortable that she had almost forgotten the bitter cold just beyond the hide walls. Her eyelids felt heavy as the excitement of the day finally gave way to drowsiness. The family finished their supper. Quietly, Bluebird passed around a skin of water, and each drank a little, careful not to waste a drop now that streams were frozen. Red Hawk added a last chunk of wood to the fire for the evening. The flames leapt briefly, illuminating the teepee brightly and sending new shadows dancing across the curved hide walls. Painted on those walls were faint designs, symbols of their family and experiences. One could make out the silhouette of a buffalo bull and some handprints in red ochre. On one side, a spiral and stars had been painted long ago, representing the morning star and the circle of life. In the flicker of the fire, these designs seemed alive and moving. Little Flower watched the shadows with fascination. For a little while, the family decided to enjoy a simple game to lift their spirits before bed. Red Hawk produced a small set of carved bone pieces used in the moccasin guessing game, a favorite winter pastime. Laughing softly, he hid one of the small bones under a mitten on the ground while singing a short, teasing chant. Bluebird and Little Flower clapped along to the rhythm, and when he finished, Little Flower eagerly guessed which mitten covered the bone. She chose the left. Red Hawk lifted it to reveal nothing underneath, prompting White Feather to chuckle. On her second try, the girl picked the right mitten and found the bone, earning gentle cheers. They played a few rounds of this traditional hand game in the firelight, enjoying a bit of fun and friendly competition. The game's songs and laughter echoed softly against the hide walls, bringing a sense of normalcy and joy, even on a cold night. Eventually, the game gave way to quieter activities as sleepiness crept in. One shadow on the wall was the silhouette of her grandmother, who now sat by the fire with her sewing bag. Despite the late hour, White Feather took out a small, unfinished pair of moccasins she had been beading. Winter nights were long, and often the women kept their hands busy with crafts if they weren't too sleepy. By engaging in these quiet tasks, they passed the coldest months productively. White Feather's old eyes squinted a little in the dimness as she threaded a needle with sinew. The light was not ideal for detailed work, but she had done this for decades and could work by feel and memory. "Grandmother, you're going to sew now?" Little Flower asked, surprised to see her take up work. "Oh, only a little," White Feather replied kindly. "I want to finish this design on your new moccasins so you can wear them when spring comes." She held up one tiny moccasin, partially covered in blue and white bead patterns that resembled snowflakes. "See? Nearly done." Little Flower smiled at the thought of new moccasins and snuggled against her mother. Bluebird was mending a tear in one of the robes with swift, skilled stitches. Red Hawk, for his part, was smoking his pipe quietly, sitting cross-legged at the opposite side of the fire. The pipe's sweet scent of kinnikinick, a mix of red willow bark and other herbs, drifted pleasantly through the lodge. Winter was the time when he could enjoy a leisurely smoke after dinner without rushing off anywhere. As they engaged in these gentle, homely activities, the sense of peace grew. The wind outside had settled into a steady whisper. Occasionally, a burst of colder air would leak under the edge of the teepee cover, but the liner and the careful placement of stones at the base of the cover kept most drafts out. Indeed, earlier that season they had placed a circle of small stones around the teepee's base after pitching it to hold the edges down. These stones now sat half buried in snow outside, unseen, but doing their job. The Plains people often did this when camped in one spot for long. Later generations would find those stones in circles, the archaeological traces of winter camps from decades past. Within the lodge, any cold that did sneak in was quickly chased away by the fire and the warm bodies around it. One truly felt as if the teepee were a living, breathing entity, breathing smoke out the top, glowing warm at its heart. Whitefeather's soft voice began to hum a gentle tune as she worked. It was a familiar lullaby, one she had sung to her own children and now to Little Flower. The melody was wordless at first, a soothing sequence of rising and falling notes like the wind over the prairie. Bluebird joined in quietly after a moment, her higher voice weaving with her mother's lower tones. The song they hummed was about the night and the campfires, a lullaby to remind children that the camp is safe and watched over. Little Flower didn't know all the words yet, but she knew the feeling of the song. She sighed contentedly and fought to keep her eyes open, wanting to listen longer. The flickering light painted comforting shapes on the lodge wall. She imagined one shadow looked like a great buffalo lying down, another like a bird with outstretched wings. As the women continued their soft lullaby, Red Hawk closed his eyes and leaned his head back, letting the music wash over him too. It reminded him of his own childhood. He could recall being Little Flower's age, bundled in furs beside his siblings, hearing his mother sing on a cold night just like this. Now he was the father, and the cycle continued. From outside came a muffled howl, a coyote calling to its mate, or perhaps a lone wolf in the distance. Little Flower stirred. "What was that?" she murmured, half asleep. "Just a coyote singing his own song," whispered Bluebird. "He is telling his family good night." In their culture, the howling of coyotes and wolves could be both a reminder of the wilderness and a kind of music. It didn't frighten them. On the contrary, it was a normal part of the winter night's chorus. Whitefeather added softly, "They have their fur coats to keep them warm out there, and we have ours in here." She ran, a hand over the fur of the buffalo robe beside her. "We are all right, little one." Reassured and deeply sleepy now, Little Flower nodded. In the dim light, her eyes finally closed. Bluebird carefully lifted the girl and wrapped her in a child-sized buffalo robe, then laid her down on the bedding. Little Flower curled instinctively towards the warm space where her mother would soon lie beside her. The family fell into a tranquil silence. Only the crackle of the fire and the occasional pop of a sap pocket in the wood broke the quiet. Red Hawk gently tapped out his pipe and covered the little ember left in it. He tucked the pipe back into its beaded case, an important item that he treated with respect. Then he rose slowly, stretching his legs. Though the tipi was spacious, about 19 feet across, the family naturally kept close to the center, near the fire. It was an old habit born of warmth and togetherness. Around them, the edges of the lodge were darker and cooler, where extra supplies and tools were stored against the hide walls. Before lying down, Red Hawk decided to step outside briefly to check on the night and the horses. He pulled on his thick buffalo fur coat, a coat made from the hide of a buffalo bull with the hair left on, which covered him from neck to knee. Its weight settled on his shoulders, heavy but comforting. For his feet, he slipped on a pair of sturdy deerskin moccasins lined with rabbit fur. Each was insulated with dried grass and wool as well, forming a snug booty. He then quickly wrapped additional strips of buffalo hide around them to act as overshoes against the snow, effectively creating a double layer that kept his feet dry and warm. On his hands, he wore mittens sewn from beaver pelt, the dense fur repelling wind. His head was covered with a woolen hood beneath the high collar of his buffalo coat. In these simple ways, he armed himself against the biting air outside, dressed almost as warmly as the buffalo themselves in their winter coats. "I'll be back in a few moments," he murmured to Bluebird. She gave a knowing nod. This was part of the nightly routine. The horses needed checking and nature might call. With that, Red Hawk loosened the door flap and stepped out into the blackness beyond, leaving the cozy orange glow of the teepee for the starlit cold of the prairie night. Chapter 2. Under the Winter Stars. Outside, the world was silent, sparkling, and brutally cold. Red Hawk inhaled sharply as the freezing air hit his lungs. In the darkness, the snow-covered ground glowed faintly under starlight. His breath rose in small clouds around his face, and ice crystals glittered in his fur hood. He stood still for a moment, letting his eyes adjust. Above him arched the great bowl of the night sky, so clear that countless stars formed a bright river of light overhead. In the far north, he noticed a faint curtain of pale green wavering. The northern lights were dancing low on the horizon, flickering gently. The people viewed these Wangly Laxwing, northern lights, as spirits playing in the upper world, another reassuring sign that even the cold night was alive with friendly powers. The Lakota knew that shining band of the Milky Way as the Spirit Road, the path along which the souls of ancestors traveled among the stars. Tonight, it stretched from horizon to horizon, a comforting reminder of the greater world beyond. He pulled his buffalo hide coat tighter and walked softly through the snow toward the horse enclosure. The camp's horses were kept in a stand of leafless willows down by the river bend, where the trees broke the wind. There, a crude circular corral of rope and fallen branches had been set up to discourage the animals from wandering. As Red Hawk neared the cluster of willows, he made a soft whinnying sound with his lips to announce his approach. A few dark shapes shifted in response. The horses recognized his scent and voice. He found his favorite bay mare and ran a hand along her neck. The horse's coat was thick with winter hair and felt warm despite the frost that had settled on the tips. "How Kola? Hello, friend," Red Hawk whispered to the mare. The horse nickered softly, its breath visible in the dark. Red Hawk checked that her rawhide tether was secure and that she had not tangled it. In deep winter, the horses were often left to roam and paw through snow for grass, but on this night they had tied a few of them in the grove for safety. A recent scare with wolves earlier in the week had made the camp more cautious. A small pack had been trailing the herd, looking for any weak or stray animals. Though no attack had come, the men took turns keeping watch at night. It was Red Hawk's informal turn now. He listened carefully and gazed out at the snowy flats beyond the tree line. All he heard was the distant sigh of wind over the prairie. The dim shapes of more ponies loomed further among the trees, some standing, some lying down with legs folded, huffing steam in the cold. They were calm. If predators or intruders were nearby, the horses would be restless or snorting alerts. Tonight they seemed content if a bit hungry. One chestnut gelding was gnawing on the bark of a willow branch, scraping for some nutrition. Red Hawk had anticipated this. He bent and picked up an armful of slender willow and cottonwood sticks that he had gathered earlier and left stacked nearby. Moving among the horses, he distributed these branches to each animal. The horses eagerly took them between their big teeth, crunching the bark and twigs. In winter, when thick snow covered the grass, the people often cut branches so the ponies could eat the inner bark, a makeshift fodder that provided some energy. The sound of horses chewing in the darkness was oddly soothing. "There you go, Iopeia, my friend," he murmured to a younger horse as it chomped noisily. The mare he had first approached nudged him as if looking for more. He stroked her muzzle. "Just a little longer, and the grass will return," he said quietly, knowing full well that many hard weeks likely remained before spring. Still, caring for the horses gave him a sense of purpose and connection on these nights. They were vital to the life of the camp, for travel, for hunting, and they were also companions in this shared endurance of winter. Red Hawk walked a slow circuit around the encampment. He could see the silhouettes of dozens of tipis in the starlight, arranged in a wide circle that followed tradition. At the center of the circle lay an open area blanketed in untouched snow, the heart of the camp where gatherings might be held in milder weather. Now it was empty and silent. Many lodges had low glows coming from their smoke holes or beneath their door flaps, evidence of the small fires still burning inside. He could imagine each family tucked in, much like his own, finding warmth in the company of loved ones, telling stories or singing quietly to lull the children. Toward the eastern side of the camp, he noticed a particularly large lodge that belonged to Yellow Hawk, an elder of their Cheyenne allies who were camping with them this season. A faint murmur of voices came from there, and Red Hawk guessed that Yellow Hawk might be entertaining some youngsters with a story or two. It was common on winter nights for people to visit each other's tipis to share stories and companionship, especially if someone in particular was known as a great storyteller. The Cheyenne elder's voice rose briefly on the air. Red Hawk couldn't make out the words, but he smiled, imagining the children in that lodge gathered around to listen with rapt attention. In these difficult months, such moments of community and narrative were as nourishing as the food in their bellies. Red Hawk paused and looked up again at the sky. The stars seemed to flicker more intensely now that he was fully dark adapted. There was Tangyanke, the bison star, as some called Jupiter, low in the south, and the sparkling cluster of the Pleiades high above, the 7 brothers that his people often pointed out in winter. He recalled an old tale about those stars, how once 7 human brothers or friends were carried up into the sky to escape a bear, becoming a tight cluster of lights. That bear, it was said, became the bowl of the Big Dipper, forever chasing them across the heavens. Thinking of such stories gave him comfort. It meant that even in the stillness of a freezing night, the sky was alive with familiar friends and remembered lessons. A gentle north wind picked up, causing Red Hawk to pull his fur hood further down. In spite of his heavy robes, he began to feel the sting of cold creeping into his fingers and toes. It was well below 0. The kind of cold that could give an unprepared person frostbite within minutes. But Red Hawk was prepared. Besides his buffalo robe coat, he wore layered leggings and a wool trade blanket wrapped around his waist, and fur-lined mittens on his hands. His moccasins were stuffed with dry grass for insulation. The ancestors had passed down all these techniques to survive the killing cold. He flexed his fingers inside the mittens and lightly stomped his feet to keep blood flowing. After completing one more careful look around the outskirts of camp, including a stop at a ridge to scan the moonlit valley for any dark shapes of buffalo or enemy scouts, seeing none, Red Hawk decided all was well. It was time to return to the warmth of his lodge. The thought made him quicken his pace. The snow squeaked under his moccasins as he made his way back, guided by the memory of where his family's tipi stood in the ring of lodges. He recognized it by the pair of crossed sticks jutting above the smoke flaps. Each family often had slight, unique touches to their lodge, and he knew his own, even in darkness. At the door, he carefully untied and lifted the hide flap and slipped inside. The sudden change in temperature was intense. The inside felt almost balmy compared to the frigid outdoors. In the dim firelight, he saw his family's forms bundled on the bedding. Bluebird looked up from under a buffalo robe when she heard him enter. Red Hawk's face was ruddy from the cold, and he quickly shut the door securely, placing a weighted stick at its base to seal out drafts. "All is calm," he whispered to his wife, answering the question she hadn't asked, but was certainly wondering. She nodded and smiled drowsily, welcoming him back into their cocoon of warmth. Red Hawk crouched by the fire pit. The flames had died down to a bed of glowing coals while he was outside, but that was by design. Bluebird had banked the fire, covering it partially with ashes to keep it smoldering slowly rather than blazing. This conserved fuel and maintained gentle warmth. Carefully, he took a stick and stirred the coals a bit. He decided to revive the fire just enough before they slept deeply. He placed one more small log and a buffalo chip onto the embers. The chip began to glow red, releasing steady heat without much flame or smoke. Satisfied, he sat back and let the warmth soak into him. Bluebird had already made sure Little Flower was snug, and that White Feather had everything she needed for the night. The grandmother was lightly snoring, curled, on her side with a fur wrapped over her head. Little Flower was sound asleep, clutching her little deerskin doll even in slumber. The child's face was barely visible, tucked close against her mother's side, with only a few strands of her dark hair peeking out from the robe. Bluebird herself was lying on the side closest to the door, acting as the outer barrier between the cold and the child, a protective habit of mothers. Red Hawk removed his heavy fur coat. A cascade of frost that had accumulated on it while he was outside fell in tiny crystals to the ground. He hung the coat on a wooden tripod near the door, ready for the next use, and quickly slipped out of his outer leggings as well. It was not wise to wear anything damp or snow-covered to bed, as it could chill the body. His inner garments were dry, and he would sleep in those. Before joining his family under the covers, Red Hawk performed one last small task. Next to the fire pit, there were a few round stones, each about the size of a melon. Earlier in the evening, he had placed these stones near the fire so they would heat up gradually. Now they were quite warm to the touch. Using a strip of old blanket, he picked up one heated stone and wrapped it securely. He then tucked this improvised heater into the foot of the bedding, where his wife and daughter's feet would rest. Many Plains families used this trick. warming stones by the fire, and then positioning them inside the lodge to radiate heat during the night. It was especially helpful to keep toes and fingers from getting too cold while everyone slept. Bluebird murmured a thank you when she felt the gentle warmth at her feet. Red Hawk placed a second heated stone near where his mother-in-law's back would be, not touching her but close enough to provide comfort. The old woman would surely appreciate that extra warmth. Now everything was set. Red Hawk banked the fire one final time, spreading ashes over the bright embers so they would simmer slowly until morning. The lodge dimmed to a soft red glow, shadows settling into stillness. He double-checked that the smoke flaps were angled correctly to allow a bit of airflow. It was important to have some ventilation to prevent the air from becoming too stale or lacking in oxygen overnight. A small gap at the top and a tiny crack near the door would suffice. No harsh wind was blowing at the moment, so he wasn't worried about drafts, but he still placed a couple more stones at the base of the cover on the windward side, just in case it picked up later. Finally, Red Hawk knelt and crawled under the buffalo robes beside his wife. Bluebird lifted a corner of the robe for him, and he slipped in, immediately feeling the benefit of the shared heat. Little Flower stirred slightly, sensing her father's return, and in her sleep she made a tiny sigh and burrowed closer to her mother. Red Hawk gently draped an additional small deer-hide blanket over the child's back, and then wrapped his arms around both his wife and daughter. Bluebird's body was warm against his. She was like a living furnace after being near the fire and under the covers for so long. He felt a wave of gratitude for her and for the simple blessing of being warm on a deadly cold night. In the stillness, Red Hawk listened. The night sounds were subdued. Through the insulated layers of hide, he could hear only a faint moan of wind and the very distant howling of a wolf pack far out on the plains. These sounds no longer unsettled him. They were part of the background of life here. Inside their lodge, it was quiet and secure. He felt Bluebird's breathing slow and steady under his arm, and he knew she was drifting into deeper sleep. Across the fire pit, Whitefeather shifted slightly with a rustle of blankets, but her breathing too was peaceful. Red Hawk gazed at the reddish glow of the last embers through half-closed eyes. In that glow, the painted symbols on the teepee's interior seemed to fade into the darkness until they were invisible. He felt as though the lodge around him had expanded into a great dark dome, like he was lying directly under the night sky, but still warm. It was a strange, comforting illusion that came to him sometimes at night, perhaps a blending of dream and reality. He imagined that the spirit road of stars above was directly over them, connecting their snug camp to the infinite heavens. Before sleep claimed him, Red Hawk whispered a final prayer in the silence of his heart. He thanked the spirits of the buffalo for their hides which kept them warm, thanked the fire for its warmth, and thanked the Creator for seeing his family safely through another day. Winter nights were long and could be cruel, but in moments like this he felt only contentment and even a kind of joy. They had everything they truly needed in this little world of their Tipi: shelter, heat, food, and each other. Holding his loved ones close, Red Hawk closed his eyes. The gentle warmth of the buffalo robes, the lullaby of the wind outside, and the lingering glow of the hearth all wove together into a blanket of sleep. In a matter of minutes, he too was asleep, breathing deeply and evenly. Outside, the stars continued to wheel slowly across the sky. The camp of Tipis huddled in the winter valley remained still, each lodge harboring its own circle of dreams and comfort in the vast, frozen night. Chapter 3. The Storyteller's Lodge. In another lodge, not far from Red Hawk's, an elder prepared to share a story with those gathered around his fire. Yellow Hawk, the Cheyenne storyteller, sat on a fur blanket with children clustered at his feet, and a few younger adults seated respectfully around the lodge perimeter. The atmosphere inside was cozy and expectant. A small fire flickered, casting playful shadows on the hide walls, which were painted with scenes of old battles and sacred animals. The listeners had finished their evening meal and had come together specifically to hear Yellow Hawk's tales. Outside, the same cold wind blew, but here inside his tipi, hearts and bodies were warm. Yellow Hawk was a man with graying hair in 2 braids and deep laugh lines in his face. His voice was usually soft-spoken, but when telling stories it could become powerful or playful as needed. He had earned a reputation in the camp as a keeper of the old stories. On winter nights, families often invited him to tell the traditional tales, the ones that taught lessons and kept their history alive. Tonight, he had agreed to entertain his own grandchildren and a few of their friends. It was, after all, the proper season for such things. The children wriggled in excitement, bundling themselves in their quilts and robes as they sat. One little boy was hugging his knees, eyes wide in anticipation. A girl of about 10 with braids, Yellow Hawk's eldest granddaughter, held a small pouch of tobacco in her hands, knowing what was expected. Before any story was told, there were customs to observe. The girl got up and respectfully handed the tobacco pouch to her grandfather. Yellow Hawk accepted it with a gracious nod. To have a storyteller share a tale was considered an honor, a true gift, and it was only right to offer a gift in return, often tobacco. Aho hel changtemaza, thank you. He thanked her, using words from his Cheyenne dialect as he gently took the pouch. He took a pinch of the tobacco and opened the door flap briefly to toss the offering outside onto the snow. In a low voice, he addressed the darkness beyond, offering that tobacco to the spirits of the story and the night, as was custom. The listeners fell quiet, observing this ritual. Yellow Hawk then closed the flap and drew his buffalo robe around him as he returned to his place. Now all eyes were on the elder. The children's faces shone with firelight and anticipation. The only other sounds were the crackling of the fire and the soft hoot of an owl somewhere outside. Yellow Hawk began, speaking in a rhythmic tone that immediately cast a spell of attention over the lodge. "This is the time of long nights and deep snows," he said. "We gather to hear the stories that are only told in winter, when the animals are asleep and the thunder beings have gone away until spring. We can speak freely of the old tales. The story I will tell you now was told to me by my grandfather on a night just like this, many winters ago." A hush fell as he continued. The youngest child, a little girl, curled up against her mother and listened with big round eyes. The older ones leaned forward, eager to catch every word. Yellow Hawk's voice took on a narrative cadence. "Long ago, in the time when the world was new, there was no winter. The earth knew only warmth and green life. Summer was eternal. The buffalo and deer roamed an endless sea of grass, and the people did not know the bite of frost or the hush of snowfall. But because the world was always warm, some say it grew too hot and dry. The rivers shrank, the animals grew tired, and the plants wilted without rest. And so the Great Spirit saw that this eternal summer was not good for the earth. There needed to be balance. He paused, letting the idea sink in. A boy by the fire frowned slightly. Imagining a world with no winter was easy, but thinking that it could be a bad thing was a new idea to him. Yellowhawk continued. At that time, winter was not yet a season. Winter was a spirit, a great being who lived far in the north where the sun's power was weak. This spirit was cold and beautiful. He wore a cloak of snow and had a crown of icicles. The Great Spirit spoke to Winter and said, "Come south and bring your gift of cold, so that the earth may rest." Winter was proud and strong. He agreed to come, but once he arrived, his cold breath blanketed the lands for a long, long time. The people and animals, who had never felt such cold, suffered greatly at first. Rivers turned to ice. The buffalo's food was hidden under snow, and the people shivered without furs thick enough to fend off the new chill. Many cried out in confusion and pleaded with the Great Spirit to make it warm again. The elder's voice rose and fell dramatically, and the children huddled a little closer to their parents as they imagined that first dreadful cold. But they knew a resolution must be coming. Yellowhawk gave a small smile and went on. The Great Spirit heard the pleas of the people and saw that winter, for all his importance, was too harsh to rule the year alone. So he summoned another Great Spirit, Summer, the spirit of warmth and growth. Summer came from the south, gentle and bright, wearing a cloak of green leaves and a crown of flowers. When summer arrived, the ice began to melt and the snows receded. The buffalo and all animals rejoiced to have grass and warm winds again. The people rejoiced too. But then summer stayed and stayed, long past when crops had grown and harvest had come. The world grew hot and dry once more. You see, summer alone was not the answer either. A few of the adults murmured appreciatively at the lesson in balance. Yellowhawk took the opportunity to scoop a ladle of water from a wooden bowl at his side and pour a bit onto the fire. It sizzled, sending up a puff of steam. The children watched the steam coil upward. "Finally," he said, "the Great Spirit brought winter and summer together to make peace. Neither could banish the other completely, for each had a role to play in the circle of life. They had to learn to share the year. After some argument, winter can be very stubborn and summer very passionate. They struck an agreement. Winter would reign for part of the year and summer for another part, with 2 smaller seasons of change in between to hand off the power. The people, animals, and plants would adjust their lives to this sacred rhythm, a time for growth and abundance, and a time for rest and renewal. Thus the seasons were born. Yellowhawk glanced around to ensure the children understood. He saw their eyes shining. They were following along closely. He proceeded softly now. In the beginning, the people didn't know how to survive winter's time, since it was all new to them. But the spirits took pity and taught them. The Great Spirit sent the buffalo with thick hides so that people might make warm robes. He showed them how to make fire and shelter. Winter himself, though fierce, offered beauty too. The sparkle of snow, the quiet of the woods, the clear brilliance of the night stars. The people came to appreciate winter's gifts, not only fear his bite. They learned to tell stories and sing songs during his long nights, which made them wise and strong in their hearts. One little girl who sat on her mother's lap raised her hand slightly, as if in school. Yellowhawk paused. "Yes, little fawn?" he gently prompted, knowing the child might have a question. In a timid voice, she asked, "Did they get cold like us in the story?" Clearly, she was empathizing with the ancient people in winter's first arrival. Yellowhawk smiled warmly. "Oh, yes, at first they surely did, but they learned quickly. The story says that one night, as a family huddled together for warmth, the spirit winter saw their small child crying from cold, and even that mighty winter felt compassion. He blew a softer wind that night so the fire could stay lit and the child would sleep. It's said that ever since then, winter always has a gentle side amid his cold. For example, he gives us calm, windless nights like tonight, when the cold is gentle if you sit by a fire." Several listeners nodded, and some glanced toward the door flap, as if to acknowledge the calm weather outside, as if winter himself were listening and proving the point. "Anyway," continued the elder, "once the people adapted, they no longer feared winter so much. They still respected him, and to this day we respect the winter as a powerful friend who tests us. But we know we can survive it, and even find joy in it. And likewise, we know summer, for all her warmth, can be harsh too, with drought or scorching heat if not balanced. So it is good that each takes a turn." He spread his hands in a gesture of balance. One of the older boys, a teenager, spoke up politely. "Grandfather, what about spring and fall? Did the story mention them?" Yellowhawk grinned, pleased at the question. "Ah, yes, the story does not forget them. After winter and summer made peace, the Great Spirit created two smaller spirits, the daughters of winter and summer. One was named Spring, the other Autumn. Spring would come before summer to wake the sleeping world with rains and thaw. Autumn would come before winter to help the world prepare with cool days and falling leaves, telling the creatures to gather food and make shelter. These daughters bridged the gap between their parents, ensuring the transition would be gradual rather than sudden. And that is how the 4 seasons came to be, each with its own spirit, its own purpose." A collective sigh went around the Tipi as the story reached its comforting conclusion. The children visibly relaxed, knowing that winter and summer were balanced and that the struggles in the tale were resolved. The glow of the fire had dimmed a bit, as if in tandem with the gentle epilogue. Yellowhawk added a final thought, more of a moral. "So, you see, everything in life is a circle, a balance. Night and day, cold and hot, rest and work. Winter teaches us patience and resilience, just as summer teaches us joy and abundance. We need both. And during winter's time, we have our stories, our families, and our courage to carry us through." The parents and other adults murmured softly, "Hey, hey, that's true," echoing assent as was customary. A couple of them offered the storyteller quiet words of thanks for his wisdom. The children, meanwhile, were getting sleepy. The littlest ones had edged closer to their mothers or older siblings. One boy had nodded off with his head on his sister's lap, lulled by the elder's calm voice and the warmth of the fire. Little Fawn, who had asked the question, was fighting to keep her eyes open, but losing the battle. Her mother gently stroked her hair, encouraging her to rest. Seeing his audience fully satisfied and growing drowsy, Yellowhawk concluded the storytelling session. "Now, that is enough for tonight," he said softly. "Ena hing hang ni king hang lel, sleep well, children. Dream of warm days and starry nights." He leaned forward and used a stick to bank his fire, much as Redhawk had in his own lodge. The flames reduced to a faint glow. In the dimness, one of the other men in the lodge quietly rose and added a couple of buffalo chips to the fire to keep the coals alive until morning. Families began to rearrange themselves, each returning to their own bedding. 2 of the visiting children were gently carried back to their parents' Tipi next door, already fast asleep and oblivious to the handoff. Yellowhawk's grandchildren remained, of course, and they eagerly snuggled into their sleeping robes, the story they'd just heard drifting through their minds. Yellowhawk himself lay down with a content sigh. He was happy to have passed on important knowledge, and happy to see the young ones drifting to sleep with peaceful expressions. As he closed his eyes, he silently thanked the Creator for the gift of storytelling. It was indeed, as they said, a gift both to give and receive. In the quiet that followed, the only sound was the soft breathing of the family and the crackle of a tiny flame licking at a buffalo chip in the fire pit. That night, in dreams, some of the children would remember fragments of the story, perhaps picturing the mighty winter spirit blowing snow across the plains, or the gentle summer spirit laying a blanket of grass and flowers. Perhaps little Fawn, in her sleep, envisioned winter and summer shaking hands under the watch of the Great Spirit, agreeing to share time. These images would sink into their subconscious, teaching them that the bitter cold outside was not a punishment, but a necessary part of life's circle. And with that understanding came comfort. In Yellowhawk's lodge, as in many others, the people drifted into slumber. The fires burned low, and the storyteller's words lingered like echoes in the darkness. The Great Plains night held the camp in its frosty embrace, but inside each tipi, warmth, love, and the wisdom of generations created an oasis of life. Chapter 4. Painting the Winter Count. Deep in the winter, during a calm, clear day, an elder named Painted Elk sat inside his teepee, absorbed in a task of memory and artistry. The low sun of afternoon cast a pale light through the smoke hole and door flap, supplementing the warm glow of the small fire. Around Painted Elk were gathered a few children and young men, watching quietly as he worked on the tribe's winter count, the historical record kept on a buffalo hide. This was a tradition among many plains tribes. Each year, the keeper of the winter count added one symbol to record the most important event of that year. Over time, these symbols formed a spiral or line that told the story of the people, year by year, winter by winter. In the gentle hush, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and Painted Elk's soft voice as he explained what he was doing. In front of him stretched a large buffalo robe, tanned to a soft golden brown, with many small pictographs drawn on it in a spiral pattern. He leaned over it, using a sharpened stick dipped in natural pigment, black charcoal and red ochre mixed with grease, to carefully outline the latest symbol. Despite his age, his hand was steady. The children craned their necks to see the emerging image on the hide. Painted Elk was a respected historian of the band, and he took his duty seriously. The winter count was not merely artwork. It was the community's shared memory. In a time before written letters, these pictures captured the years of triumph and hardship so that no one would forget. The hide he was painting on had symbols going back many decades, passed down from the previous keeper to him. This robe has seen more winters than I have. He chuckled quietly, glancing at a boy beside him. My grandfather's grandfather started it on a buffalo skin like this long ago. Each winter, after the first snowfall, they would decide what important thing happened that year and add a picture for it. One of the older girls, perhaps 12 years of age, traced a finger in the air along the spiral of symbols. She recognized some that Painted Elk had told stories about before. "Grandfather, can you tell us what some of these mean again?" she asked politely. The elder smiled. He enjoyed teaching the young ones. He pointed with his paint stick to a symbol that looked like a series of tipis in a circle. "That one, here near the center, is from the year we first made peace with the Cree and camped together as friends. See the circle of lodges? That was a very good year." The children nodded. They had heard of that peace treaty in stories. He moved his finger to a different mark, a simple outline of a bison with a line across it. His tone grew a bit somber. "And this," he said, "represents the winter of the Great Starvation, when the buffalo herds moved far south, and many of our people went hungry. The line through the buffalo means no buffalo were taken that year." The listeners fell silent, imagining how hard that winter must have been. Painted Elk continued, "We remember that time, so we will always be grateful in years of plenty, and plan better so such hardship does not come again." The firelight flickered across the elder's weathered face as he recounted more symbols. There was one of a comet streaking across the sky. The year the great star was seen in the north, very bright, he described. Another showed a figure wearing a headdress falling from a horse. The year our chief was thrown from his horse and injured during a hunt. Not all events were tragic. Some were wondrous or humorous. Painted Elk chuckled as he pointed out a symbol of a teepee with what looked like raindrops inside it. This was the winter when a squirrel fell down through someone's smoke hole during a rainstorm. It caused quite a ruckus in the lodge. People talked about it for years, so it made it onto the winter count. The children giggled at that, picturing a soggy squirrel scurrying around a teepee. As Painted Elk talked, he continued to paint the new symbol for the current winter. The year now being added was known in the camp as the Winter of the Big Snowdrifts, as just a month earlier, a massive blizzard had piled snow higher than anyone remembered. To represent it, he was drawing a line of large snow mounds beside a teepee. Under his skilled hand, the image took shape. Tiny cones for teepees nearly buried in curved shapes indicating drifts. He added a small human figure on top of a drift to show how people had to climb over the snow. The children murmured in appreciation. They all remembered playing on those very drifts after the storm. And now that fun memory was becoming part of history. When the symbol was finished, Painted Elk sat back and inspected his work. Satisfied, he cleaned the tip of his paint stick and laid it aside. The buffalo hide canvas now bore another chapter of their story. He reached for a tin cup of lukewarm tea by the fire and sipped it, resting his back for a moment. One of the young men present, White Feather's son, Running Fox, leaned forward respectfully. "Grandfather," he asked, "where will you start next year's symbol? There's not much space left in the spiral. Painted Elk acknowledged this with a nod. Indeed, the spiral of years had almost reached the hide's edge. I think after this winter we will begin a new hide, he said. This one is nearly full. In the spring I will prepare a fresh buffalo robe for the Count. And see here, he pointed to the empty margin near the hide's edge. I left a little space after the snowdrift symbol. In case something else important happens before this winter is over, we have room to add it. The listeners considered that. Winter was still underway. Who knew what events might come? Running Fox grinned. Perhaps the great buffalo will return in a giant herd before spring, and we will hunt enough meat for 3 winters, he suggested, half joking. Painted Elk laughed, the lines around his eyes crinkling. If that happens, my boy, we will certainly add it here in bright red. He then folded his hands over his knees and looked around at the small audience. You see, children, this is how we remember. In 100 winters, none of us will be here, but our descendants will look at these marks and know what we lived through. They will know our joys and sorrows, so they can learn from them. The girl who had asked about the symbols nodded thoughtfully. The idea that one day she would be an ancestor in someone's story made her feel both curious and proud. Painted Elk gently rolled up the winter count hide to store it. As he did, he instructed Running Fox to add another small log to the fire. The afternoon cold was creeping in again as the sun sank lower. The hide would be kept safely with his sacred items, and when spring came, they would hold a gathering to recount all the events on it, sharing the history with those who had not heard the older stories. The winter count was a communal treasure. Often during winter, people would gather to have the keeper narrate the symbols in order, reminding everyone of the past. Painted Elk looked forward to doing that at the end of this winter when the storms had passed and people were eager for diversion. As the youth placed a log on the fire, sparks flew upward and smoke wafted out the top of the lodge. Painted Elk stood up slowly, stretching his stiff limbs. One of the smaller boys quietly fetched his buffalo robe and draped it over the elder's shoulders, knowing he might be chilly after sitting still for so long. Painted Elk smiled and patted the boy's head in thanks. Outside, the winter daylight was fading toward evening. The little group began to disperse. Some children were being called by their mothers to help with supper, and Running Fox needed to check on the horses. Before leaving, each child thanked the elder politely for sharing the stories of the winter count. Filamayaye, Lexi, thank you, uncle, said the girl with braids, using a kinship term respectfully. Painted Elk responded with a kind, you are most welcome. Remember what you learned today. Soon, Painted Elk was left alone in his tipi, the rolled winter count resting beside him. He gazed at the fire, adding a pinch of dried sage to it. A fragrant smoke rose, and he let it cleanse the air. The elder closed his eyes briefly and murmured a prayer of gratitude, thanking the Creator for allowing him to fulfill his duty of remembering, thanking the buffalo whose hide carried the history, and thanking the youth who showed such interest. In that peaceful moment, time felt fluid. The past and present were linked by the images on the hide, and the future would link through the children who had absorbed the lessons. Through the small opening at the top of the lodge, Painted Elk could see the first stars of evening appear in the blue-gray sky. Another winter night was beginning, calm and cold. Pulling his robe snug around him, the elder felt content. They had recorded another year. Their story continued on. By the light of the fire, the old man reached for a wooden flute that hung from a peg. As the camp prepared for night, he put the flute to his lips and played a gentle melody, a slow, haunting song that floated out into the crisp air. It was a song for the ancestors, a song of memory and hope. The notes drifted over the snowy ground, heard faintly by those in nearby lodges. It was Painted Elk's way of honoring all the winters that had come before, and welcoming this new night with peace. Chapter 5. Storm in the Night. The sky had been an iron gray all day, and by nightfall the blizzard struck. A furious north wind roared across the plains, driving snow before it like white smoke. In the darkness, the entire camp was engulfed by whirling, stinging snow that erased the familiar landscape. Tipi walls flapped and strained against their ties, and the voices of men and women called out through the gale as everyone rushed to secure their lodges. Inside Red Hawk's teepee, the family gathered anxiously around the fire. The lodge quivered in the gusts, the hide cover puffing inward like a sail, then snapping back. Fine, powdery snow found its way in through every tiny gap, swirling in wisps around the floor. Bluebird hurried to pull more of their possessions away from the edges of the lodge so they wouldn't get damp. Little Flower clung to her grandmother, startled by the howling sound that filled the air. It was a wild, high-pitched cry of wind, unlike anything she had heard before. Outside, the latigo ropes that held the teepee poles groaned with tension. Red Hawk had tied down the door flap securely, but now he crawled to the windward side of the teepee and pressed his weight against the lining and cover, trying to steady the shaking wall. "Bluebird, the rope. Check the anchor rope," he shouted above the din. She understood. The main anchor rope of the teepee, usually tied to a central peg, needed to hold firm, or the whole cover could tear away. Bluebird felt along the base of the lodge in the semi-dark, her hands finding the thick, braided rope that was looped around a stout wooden peg driven deep in the ground. She could feel that the peg was shifting slightly, loosening under the force. With no hesitation, Bluebird grabbed her buffalo robe and threw it around her shoulders. "I'm going out to fix it," she yelled to her husband. Red Hawk started to protest. The idea of his wife stepping out into that raging storm did not sit well with him. But Bluebird had already untied the door flap. A blast of icy wind and snow burst inward as she pushed herself through the opening. Red Hawk lunged to grab the edge of the hide door before it could tear off, and managed to hold it closed behind her for a moment. He peeked through a slit and saw Bluebird crouched low near the ground, struggling through knee-deep drifts toward the anchor peg, just a couple of paces from the door. Snow pelted her face, and she shut her eyes against it, feeling for the peg with her gloved hands. In those few seconds, Red Hawk's face and arms were exposed to the storm, and already he felt a burning cold pain. It was as if the night itself had claws. He could only imagine how Bluebird was faring out there. Little Flower wailed, "Mama!" from inside, seeing her mother vanish into the blinding white. White Feather rocked the child and began to hum a prayerful song, trying to calm her. Meanwhile, Red Hawk secured the door again and moved to the fire. He grabbed the longest stick he could find, a sturdy piece of ash wood, and returned to the door. He wasn't about to let Bluebird do this alone. With a deep breath, he pushed out into the fury after her. The cold outside was so intense it snatched his breath away. Snowflakes whipped against his face like tiny needles. In the darkness, he could barely make out Bluebird's form hunched by the anchor peg. The wind snatched away any words he tried to call. Instead, Red Hawk forced his body forward, leaning into the gale, each step a battle. Bluebird had her arms wrapped around the anchor peg, trying to hammer it deeper with a stone, but the ground was frozen hard. Red Hawk reached her side and immediately jammed the ash stick he'd brought into the ground beside the peg, like an extra stake. He put all his weight on it, driving it down. Bluebird, teeth chattering, looped the loose end of the anchor rope around this new stake as well, knotting it with numbed fingers. Together they pulled with all their might, setting the peg and stake more securely. A gust nearly toppled them, but Red Hawk braced his back against the Tipi wall, spreading his arms to shield Bluebird. Snow had already coated her hair and lashes. In the brief light spilling from the lodge door, he saw her determined eyes meet his. They had done what they could. It was time to get back inside. He guided her to the door and practically pushed her through ahead of him. They collapsed onto the floor, both white with snow, gasping for breath. Little Flower sobbed with relief and threw herself at her mother, clinging tightly. White Feather quickly helped brush snow off Bluebird's hair and buffalo robe, and the two women closed the door flap securely once more, fastening it with an extra leather thong for good measure. Inside the teepee, the noise of the storm was still loud, a constant whoosh and flapping, but at least they were sheltered from the direct blast now. Red Hawk's heart pounded as he checked the rope. Through the lining, he could feel it was holding taut. "It's done," he panted. "It will hold." Bluebird nodded, catching her breath. Her cheeks were red with cold, and tiny icicles had formed on her hood, where her breath froze. White Feather immediately set about warming her daughter's face with her hands, wiping away the ice. She guided Bluebird and Red Hawk both to sit near the fire. The grandmother then fed the fire more fuel, a mix of wood and buffalo chips, to build up the flame. In a storm like this, they would keep a stronger fire despite the risk of sparks. Warmth was a priority, and the smoke was being drawn out fiercely by the draft anyway. As the fire flared, orange light filled the teepee and cast dancing shadows of the family on the walls. The children's fear eased slightly in the glow. Little Flower crawled onto her mother's lap, and Bluebird wrapped a thick robe around both of them. Red Hawk was already rubbing his hands near the flames. The skin of his wrists had turned a concerning white from just that short exposure, but feeling was returning with the heat. White Feather went to her bundle of herbs and medicine. From it she pulled a small tin cup and a pouch of dried leaves. Over the fire, she poured some water from a skin into the cup and added a handful of crushed cedar and sage leaves. Soon the steam of a fragrant herbal tea rose. She handed the warm cup to Bluebird first. "Drink, my child. This will chase the chill from your bones," she said. Bluebird sipped the cedar sage tea and closed her eyes briefly, letting the warmth spread through her. Whitefeather then offered the cup to Redhawk, who did the same. The bitter, piney taste was reassuringly normal amid the chaos. The storm raged on unabated. At times, a particularly strong gust would make the entire Tipi shudder, and a high whistle would descend through the smoke flaps. During those moments, everyone fell silent, eyes on the ceiling as if willing the lodge to hold together. The children had been told stories of lodges being blown flat in terrible storms, though it rarely happened when properly staked. Still, each howl of wind tested their nerves. To keep the children and themselves calm, the adults began to occupy them with gentle distractions. Whitefeather, with Little Flower still snuggled at Bluebird's side, started recounting a story in a lullaby-like tone. She chose a familiar tale of a brave little rabbit who survived a winter storm by taking refuge in a hollow log. Her voice had to compete with the wind, but within the cozy circle of firelight, her grandchild could hear her. Little Flower listened intently, sucking on a corner of her robe, imagining the small rabbit being safe inside the log while snow piled up outside. The parallels were not lost on anyone. They too were like that rabbit, tucked safe in their lodge while the storm piled snow around them. Redhawk periodically got up to check the lodge poles and pegs he could reach from inside. He reinforced the door flap with an extra rawhide cord tied to a second peg, just to be sure it wouldn't rip open. Through small cracks, powdery snow continued to drift in, accumulating in fine dunes around the base of the lining. Now and then, Bluebird would take a broom of bound sagebrush and sweep the snow out through a little gap near the door. That gap also let in a bit of air, which the fire eagerly consumed. Across the camp, other families were enduring the storm in similar ways. At one point, Redhawk thought he heard a shout outside, perhaps a neighbor calling to check on them. He crawled to the back of the lodge and lifted the edge of the lining to put his ear to the outer wall. Yes, there, a faint holler carried by the wind. Hau hung kake, taku shnihe. It was the voice of Gray Fox from the next teepee over, yelling, "Grandfather, are you all right?" Presumably to Whitefeather, who was Gray Fox's aunt. Redhawk hollered back as loud as he could, "We're safe, taku welo." All is well. He doubted much could be heard in this gale, but he hoped the message got through. A moment later, 2 short whoops sounded, a common signal to indicate acknowledgement. Gray Fox must have heard. It warmed Redhawk's heart to know that even in this fierce storm, the people looked out for one another. Incredibly, nature's cycle continued unabated. In a lodge on the far side of camp, a young mother went into labor in the middle of the tempest. With the aid of her own mother and sisters, she delivered a healthy baby boy while the wind roared outside. Come morning, word spread of the newborn's arrival, filling everyone with awe. They decided to name the child Wanietu Tokahe, first of winter, in honor of his dramatic entry into the world. That new life, born in the very heart of the blizzard, seemed a powerful sign that even in the harshest of times, the spark of life not only endured but flourished. Hours passed, though it was impossible to tell time precisely in the blur of wind and darkness. The fire needed frequent tending, since the draft was causing it to burn faster than usual. They used up a good deal of their wood supply. Redhawk silently thanked his foresight in collecting extra fuel the day before, when the sky had looked ominous. The children dozed fitfully in their mother's arms, awakening whenever a particularly loud gust hit. Whitefeather fought off sleep, determined to keep the fire alive and her family comforted. Bluebird, exhausted from the adrenaline and effort of securing the teepee, finally slept with Little Flower held tightly against her. Redhawk stayed awake alongside his mother-in-law, both of them nodding off for minutes at a time, only to rouse and feed the fire or listen to the storm's song. It was nearly dawn when the blizzard began to abate. The howling winds diminished to a steady, low blow. Instead of horizontal sleet, gentle flakes now fell straight down as the storm snowed itself out. Inside the lodge, the family had fallen into a deeper sleep at last, lulled by the relative quiet. Redhawk, who had been poking at the fire, noticed the change. He lifted the door flap cautiously and peeked outside. The world was utterly transformed. He saw snow drifts almost up to the height of the door. The teepee of Gray Fox next door was half buried, just a rounded hump in the snow with the top of the lodge poles poking out. The sky was a dim pre-dawn blue, and the air was utterly still, as if the storm had never been. Redhawk inhaled the fresh scent of new snow. It was intensely cold. His breath puffed out white and froze on his beard, but the wind was gone. "Wiothahika, it's over," he whispered, using the Lakota word for storm. He turned back to the interior and gently stoked the fire one more time to warm the lodge before the others woke. The morning light grew. One by one, his family stirred from their sleep. Little Flower was the first to fully wake. She wriggled out from under the robes and saw her father sitting by the brightening door flap. "Papa?" she asked in a small voice. "Is it morning now?" Redhawk smiled and reached out a hand to her. "Hang, Fila. Yes, dear. It is morning. The storm has passed." Bluebird sat up next, followed by Whitefeather. They each felt the unusual silence and calm. Bluebird crawled to the door and opened it wide, letting in a flood of pale daylight. Everyone gasped softly at the sight. A 4-foot drift of snow had piled against the lodge during the night, and as the flap opened, some of it spilled inside. Outside, the camp was a world of white. Tipis that usually stood separate were now connected by slopes of snow. A few were partially collapsed under the weight, but people were already moving about to clear them and raise them again. Here and there, neighbors emerged from burrow-like doorways, laughing in relief or calling out morning greetings as if this were a fun adventure rather than a perilous trial. Little Flower scampered to the threshold and marveled at a snowbank nearly as tall as she was. The fear of the night was forgotten in her delight. She reached out with a mittened hand to touch the new snow. It sparkled like ground-up stars in the early light. Whitefeather came up behind her and wrapped a blanket around the child to ward off the chill. The grandmother looked out over the camp. Smoke was rising from many teepees now, as fires were rekindled to start the day. Already some of the women and men were breaking paths through the drifts, laughing and shouting jokingly about needing snowshoes like their northern Cree friends. A few children, undeterred by cold, were clambering atop the mounds to slide down. The great storm had ended, and all in their camp had survived it. Redhawk put an arm around Bluebird's shoulders. She leaned her head against him, both of them taking in the scene. They felt a deep gratitude to each other, to their sturdy teepee, to their community, and to the spirits that had watched over them through the blizzard. It could have been a night of tragedy, But instead here they all were, alive and well, ready for another day, knowing that the worst of winter's fury had been tamed by their unity and ingenuity. Little Flower tugged at her mother's robe. "Mama, the snow is so high. Can we play in it later?" Bluebird laughed softly, the sound of a tired but joyful mother. "Shunka sicha, dear puppy, you brave girl. Yes, you can play once the sun is higher and you've eaten something warm." She glanced at White Feather, who nodded and began readying the fire for a hearty morning soup. Before returning inside to help with breakfast, Red Hawk silently stepped a few paces out into the snow. It came up to his thighs. He turned and looked at his Tipi, solid, reliable, if a bit askew under the weight of drifts. He then raised his eyes to the brightening sky. The storm clouds were gone, and in their place a pale pink glow of sunrise touched the eastern horizon. Red Hawk closed his eyes and breathed a prayer, thanking the Great Spirit and the Spirit of the Storm for sparing them, thanking the wisdom of their ancestors for the knowledge that kept them safe. In his mind's eye, he saw again the images on Painted Elk's winter count, all those years of history where others had weathered nights like this. A smile tugged at his lips. He felt at that moment the presence of those ancestors walking with them, proud and reassuring. In his heart, he spoke to them. "We did not freeze. We lived, and we carry your knowledge forward." And so, under a pale winter sun, the people embraced the new day after the storm, already stronger and wiser for having endured its wrath together. Chapter 6. The Healing Night. The aftermath of the blizzard left more than just snowdrifts. It left a few aches, sniffles, and frost-nipped fingers among the camp residents. That evening, as a clear and bitter cold settled in, often the way after a big storm, families turned early to their beds to recover from the previous night's ordeal. In Red Hawk's teepee, all were physically safe, but Little Flower had developed a mild cough from the excitement and breathing in the cold air. By nightfall, the little girl's cheeks were flushed, and she was a bit feverish, bundled under buffalo robes. Concerned, Bluebird and White Feather set about caring for the child with their traditional remedies. The interior of the lodge was warm, perhaps even a bit steamy, because White Feather had hung damp blankets near the fire to dry, and added extra wood to raise the temperature. They knew that keeping the air moist and warm would help ease Little Flower's breathing. White Feather also retrieved a special pouch from her belongings. Inside were various dried herbs she had gathered last summer, healing plants carefully preserved for winter illnesses. Little Flower lay in her mother's lap, eyes half closed, listening to the soft murmurs of the women around her. She didn't feel very sick, just tired and with a scratchy throat. Bluebird stroked her daughter's hair and hummed gently, trying to comfort her. Red Hawk, sitting nearby, felt worry tug at him. Even a small illness in these conditions could worsen if not tended. He trusted the wisdom of his wife and mother-in-law, though. He watched as White Feather took a handful of dried leaves from her pouch and placed them into a birch bark cup of water. She set the cup by the fire to heat slowly. The air soon filled with a soothing aroma, a mix of wild mint and chamomile. White Feather had chosen these for the child's tea because mint would help clear Little Flower's stuffy nose, and chamomile would calm her and ease any soreness in the throat. As the tea steeped, Bluebird adjusted the robes around her daughter, ensuring not a sliver of cold air reached her. Little Flower dozed, lulled by her mother's warmth and the sound of crackling fire. Outside, the temperature had plummeted under the clear sky. The snow reflected the moonlight, making the night startlingly bright and silent. Most people stayed inside by their fires on such a night, only stepping out briefly to relieve themselves or check on animals. In the distance, a lone owl hooted, a sound that echoed eerily through the crisp air. Red Hawk rose and quietly left the teepee for a moment, needing to tend to something important. He went to a woodpile sheltered under tarps between the teepees to fetch more fuel for the night. The camp was tranquil. Tendrils of smoke rose straight up from each lodge into the starry sky. No wind to disturb them. The peace after the storm felt almost sacred. As he returned with an armful of wood, Red Hawk heard a gentle jingling sound, carrying through the air. It was coming from the east end of camp, likely a medicine man or healer shaking a rattle in a quiet, healing song for someone who was unwell. Indeed, others were likely tending to their sick or sore in the wake of the blizzard. He sent a silent wish that all would recover swiftly. Back in his own lodge, Red Hawk placed a few logs by the fire. Whitefeather's tea was ready. She poured some into a horn cup and let it cool to lukewarm. Then, lifting Little Flower slightly, she and Bluebird coaxed the child to drink. The girl sipped obediently. The minty liquid felt good on her throat. After finishing half the cup, she managed a small smile. "It tastes like summer," she whispered, referring to the mint which reminded her of green fields. "Yes, like summer," Whitefeather agreed softly, pleased to see the child responding. "The plants from summer are helping you now in winter." She often reminded the young ones how every season provided gifts needed for the next. Berries and herbs in summer to cure winter's ills, for example. Though here she did not cite a source, merely echoed tradition. Next, the grandmother had another treatment in mind, one she had used on her own children during deep, cold seasons. She took a flat stone that had been warming at the fire's edge and carefully wrapped it in several layers of soft buckskin. This created a gentle heating pad. She placed it at Little Flower's feet under the robes. The warmth radiated, and the child instinctively wriggled her toes toward it with a content sigh. Keeping the feet warm was one way to help draw down a fever and comfort a cough, Whitefeather believed. Bluebird, meanwhile, had fetched a small carved wooden bowl, and into it she scooped a bit of bear fat and a pinch of crushed pine needles. She warmed this mixture by the fire until the fat melted into an oil infused with pine's soothing scent. With careful hands, Bluebird rubbed this warm oil on Little Flower's chest and back. The bear grease would keep the skin from getting chilled, and the pine would, by its scent, help open her breathing. Generations of mothers had used similar balms. Long before modern vapor rubs, there was pine and fat and loving hands to apply it. Little Flower closed her eyes as her mother massaged her gently. The combination of the mint tea, the heated stone, and the pine chest rub was easing her discomfort noticeably. Her breathing sounded less congested, and a flush of warmth had returned to her small body. Red Hawk sat for a moment, listening to the night. The bitter cold outside meant the sky was utterly clear. He knew if he stepped out, he would see 1,000,000 stars glittering. But he didn't need to. He felt their presence through the smoke hole. as faint silver light. The gentle crackle of the fire and the soft murmurs of the women blending with the occasional sigh from Little Flower created a lullaby of comfort in the dark. Eventually, Little Flower's breathing grew easier, and she fell into a deep, calm sleep, sprawled comfortably against Bluebird. White Feather felt the child's forehead with the back of her hand. It was cooler now, the fever breaking. She exchanged a relieved smile with Bluebird. They decided to finally rest properly as well. White Feather whispered a prayer of thanks to the Creator and the plant spirits for helping her granddaughter heal. Bluebird gently shifted Little Flower to a snug spot between her and the grandmother, so they could keep her warm from both sides with their own bodies. Before lying down, Red Hawk banked the fire once more and put another warm stone at the foot of the bedding for good measure. The dog, a shaggy camp dog who often slept just inside the lodge entrance, sensing that all was well, stretched and yawned, then moved back to his usual place by the door. In the quiet that followed, only the soft crackle of a tiny flame and the occasional cough from distant lodges could be heard. Red Hawk sat back and marveled quietly at the scene. Here they were, in the dead of winter, inside a conical lodge of hide, tending to a child's sickness with everything nature provided: herbs, heated stones, animal warmth, and love. Outside was deathly cold. He could hear the trees popping in the distance from the freezing temperatures, but inside was a womb of care. He thought about how countless generations had done exactly this on winter nights. How many grandmothers had brewed mint and willow for a feverish child. How many mothers had stayed awake, rubbing a little one's chest by firelight. It filled him with a profound sense of connection to his ancestors and gratitude for their knowledge, which had been passed down orally and through example. He remembered being a boy and falling ill one winter with a bad cold. His own mother, who was now one of the stars above, he believed, had done just as White Feather was doing, giving him herbal teas, keeping a fire through the night, telling him stories to keep his spirits up. He could almost hear her voice blending with White Feather's, as if the veil between past and present were thin on this healing night. Eventually, White Feather herself drifted to sleep, confident that Little Flower was recovering. Bluebird was already breathing slow and deep, one arm over her child. The dog at the door let out a content little snore. Red Hawk lay down beside Bluebird and Little Flower, drawing a fur over himself. In the darkness, he whispered into the quiet lodge, "Pilamaya wakang thanka, finghe iyo thangyang unkakitu." Thank you, Great Spirit, you have helped us greatly. The only answer was the soft pop of a sap ember in the fire. Red Hawk closed his eyes, finally at ease. Winter's challenges, the storm, the cold, the illness, had come and been met, turned aside by knowledge and care. In the long, still hours of that night, the family slept deeply and peacefully, bound together by invisible cords of kinship and resilience. The small orange glow of their fire kept the darkness at bay, and in it Red Hawk's dreaming mind perhaps saw a vision of warm spring rains and green prairies ahead, the reward for all they had endured. When morning came, Little Flower awoke bright-eyed and hungry. She remembered only vaguely that she had felt ill. Mostly she recalled her mother's soothing hands and the sweet, minty taste and the warmth surrounding her. It felt almost like a dream, Bluebird and Whitefeather smiled at each other in relief and gratitude. Another small trial of winter had passed, and life went on, quietly triumphant. Chapter 7. Winter's Waniatu Wi, the last moon of winter. The final phase of winter arrived subtly. Each day the sun lingered a little longer, and the deep blues of the night sky softened as the moon cycled toward spring. The Lakota referred to late winter as Waniatu Wi, the moon of hard times, when supplies ran low and patience wore thin. But it was also the moon of hope, because every hard day meant spring drew nearer. In the camp, the people settled into a steady routine. The worst of the storms had passed, and now the world lay locked in snow and ice, bright and unchanging under the sun by day and stars by night. It was during this period that a certain calm fell over the village. Families spent more time telling stories, repairing clothes and tools, and teaching the children lessons in preparation for the active seasons to come. Inside Red Hawk's lodge one evening, the family was finishing a simple supper of dried meat boiled with a few wild turnips from their cache. The meal was filling enough, but monotony of winter diet made them dream aloud of fresh berries, wild onions, and bison hump meat roasted over an open fire. Little Flower was feeling much better, chattering between bites. She asked Whitefeather endless questions. When will the first flowers come? Can we go find them? Do the bears have babies while they sleep in winter? Her grandmother answered each one with a smile, clearly enjoying the child's energy restored. After dinner, Red Hawk stepped outside to tend to the horses and see the state of the ice on the stream nearby. He found that the snow had developed a hard crust. It crunched under his moccasins but held his weight in places. The air had a different smell now, still cold, but with a hint of dampness, as if the snow itself knew its time was nearing an end. In the west, the sun was lingering orange and pink, later than it had a month ago. He returned to the lodge with a bucket of fresh, clean snow to melt for water. As he entered, he saw Bluebird carefully packing away some winter clothes, the heaviest furs, and taking out lighter ones from storage. It was still very cold, but she had sensed the turning of the season and began small preparations. The winter moccasins lined with rabbit fur would soon be traded for lighter elk hide moccasins as the snow turned to mud. She was also inventorying their food. There was still enough pemmican and corn stored to last a few more weeks, though not much more beyond that. They would be fine, especially with the occasional rabbit or prairie chicken Red Hawk trapped. That night, they decided to hold a little family ceremony of thanks. It was prompted by Whitefeather, who announced that the thunder beings, spring rains, would be returning soon, and they should thank the winter spirits for carrying them through. After their dinner, she brought out a small braided sweetgrass, a rare item she had saved for a special moment. The sweetgrass was brown and dry, but when she lit the end, it smoldered with a fragrant, vanilla-like smoke. As the sweetgrass smoke curled upward, each of them silently offered gratitude. Red Hawk thanked Wakang Thanka, Great Mystery, for keeping their family safe and strong. Bluebird thanked the buffalo for their hides and meat that sustained them. Whitefeather thanked the healing spirits of the plants and the guidance of the ancestors. Little Flower, watching the pretty smoke, simply said, "Thank you," in her heart, in her own way perhaps to the friendly winter moon or the stars that she had gotten to know on clear nights. They passed the sweetgrass braid around, wafting the smoke over themselves in a smudging ritual to bless and purify. Whitefeather held the braid near Little Flower and instructed her to draw the smoke over her head and body with her hand. The girl did so, giggling a bit at the tickle of the smoke, but she understood it was to send away any remaining sickness or bad energy. Outside, an owl hooted and a wolf howled, both distant sounds that signaled life stirring in the late winter woods. The people considered these calls auspicious. The wolf's howl in particular signified that even the wild creatures were sensing the shift toward spring and reasserting their presence. Later that night, as all lay in their familiar places in the teepee, Whitefeather decided to indulge in one more winter custom, sharing a final sacred story that could only be told in winter. She realized once the first thunder of spring arrived, these tales would be put away until next cold season. So, in a soft voice, she told Little Flower the story of how the morning star came to be placed in the sky. It was a beautiful, gentle tale about a young girl who was carried up by a spirit to become the morning star, bringing hope of dawn to her people every day. As Whitefeather spoke, her words were slow and rhythmic, almost chant-like. The others listened with eyes closed, envisioning the celestial drama above. Little Flower fought sleep just long enough to hear the end, how the morning star promised to watch over her people each night and herald the coming of each new day. It was a comforting promise. Not long after, the child drifted to sleep, dreaming of stars. One by one, Bluebird, Red Hawk, and finally Whitefeather herself followed, each feeling peaceful. In the middle of that night, something gently roused Red Hawk from slumber. It was silence, a deep, uncanny quiet outside. He realized the wind had completely stilled, and even the usual groaning of trees or crackling of ice was absent. Curious, he carefully eased out from under the buffalo robe and padded to the door flap. He nudged it open and peered out. A breathtaking sight greeted him. The moon was new, so the sky was moonless and dark. But the entire vault of heaven was filled with stars more numerous than he had ever seen. It seemed every single pinprick of light was visible in the crystal clear air. The Milky Way was a broad swath. Overhead, and right in the east, just above the horizon, shone the morning star, Venus, incredibly bright and steady. It must have been the pre-dawn hours, for only then does the morning star rise. Red Hawk recalled the story Whitefeather had told. He felt as if the young girl in the tale were indeed up there, shining down reassurance. The night was so quiet he could hear the soft crunch of snow as a lone figure, likely a man from a neighboring lodge, walked toward the edge of camp, perhaps going to check a trap line early. The figure paused and waved at Red Hawk in silhouette. Red Hawk waved back quietly. All was well. He returned inside and stoked the fire just a touch to ensure the teepee would be warm when the others awoke at sunrise. Then he lay back down, wrapping an arm around Bluebird and Little Flower, who were breathing in unison. As he was about to slip back into dreams, he heard Whitefeather's gentle voice speak in the darkness. "Is it almost dawn?" she whispered. She had been lightly awakened when he left the bed. "Yes, I think soon, Ina, Mother," Red Hawk replied softly. "The morning star is shining." Whitefeather made a pleased sound. "Oh, hang! That is good. I will rise to greet the star in a moment." It was her habit, a traditional one, to pray at the appearance of the morning star, offering a welcome to the day and gratitude for surviving the night. Red Hawk drifted off before he heard her actually do it, but he knew at the first faint light she would quietly open the flap, burn a small pinch of tobacco as offering, and speak to the star and the coming sun with words of blessing. When the true dawn finally came, a glowing ember on the eastern horizon, the camp slowly came alive with it. People emerged from Tipis to find the air strangely mild. The frost that usually coated every surface was lighter. Birds, some chickadees and early returning meadowlarks, were actually chirping in the bare willows by the creek. Children ran to play on the shrinking snow piles with joyful abandon, sensing that the end of confinement was near. Over the next days, temperatures rose above freezing in the afternoons. Snow began to slump and drip. Winter's back was broken. It would still be some time before the world was green. But the hardest part, the long, dark vigil of deep winter, was over. On a bright afternoon, the leaders organized a modest Thanksgiving feast to celebrate their survival. Everyone contributed a bit of their remaining food stores, a sack of dried corn here, some jerky and prairie turnips there, and they cooked a rich stew that was shared by all. As they ate together in the pale spring sunshine, laughter and stories flowed. They reminisced about the worst blizzard and the funniest moments of winter, and gave thanks collectively for making it through. It was a final strengthening of communal bonds, a way to ensure that they stepped into the new season with full hearts and bellies. In fact, a stroke of good fortune came not long after. A small band of buffalo, perhaps winter stragglers, was spotted grazing on a south-facing slope where the snow had melted. The hunters swiftly organized and brought down 2 bison bulls. For the first time in months, the camp enjoyed abundant fresh meat, tender hump ribs roasted over open fires, and rich marrow from the bones. They rendered new tallow and even saved the hides for future use. This bounty so late in the season felt like a reward from the Great Spirit for their perseverance. With fresh nourishment in their stomachs and renewed energy, the people were more than ready to embrace the journey into spring. As the final snow patches began to recede and the first brave blades of grass poked through the soggy earth, the camp elders announced it was time to break winter quarters. The buffalo herds would soon be on the move, and so must the people. They took time to reflect on how they had endured the long cold. One bright morning, the camp gathered once more at the central fire pit for a final ritual of leave-taking. The chief and spiritual leaders lit the sacred pipe and passed it around, each person present taking a small puff and lifting the pipe's stem toward the sky, the earth, and the 4 directions in turn. Through this Chanungpa ceremony, they offered one last thanksgiving and petition for safe travels ahead, uniting everyone's hopes in the smoke that rose into the crisp morning air. Only after this did they consider the winter camp truly closed. On the day of departure, Whitefeather led a short prayer at the central fire pit left at the winter camp. She left behind a small bundle of tobacco and sage in the ashes, an offering to the spirits of that place and season. "Pilamaya, thank you, Winter, for making us strong," she whispered, her words carrying on a mild breeze. "We will remember your lessons." Red Hawk and Bluebird loaded their travois with folded tipis and belongings their breath misting in the cool dawn. Little Flower danced around excitedly, half wrapped in a shawl, but giddy to see the new green buds on the willows. The tribe's children had survived the winter and would grow into another year, the greatest treasure of all. As they left the winter campsite, Red Hawk turned for one last look. There were circles of flattened snow and stones where Tipis had stood, quiet testimony to the lives lived there. He thought of the many winter camps that had come before, going back centuries, and how each generation had found a way to sleep through the coldest nights in those buffalo hide lodges. He smiled softly, feeling at once humbled and proud. The buffalo hide lodges had proven themselves again, durable and warm even in winter's worst. In his mind, he could still picture a scene from midwinter, the glow of a fire within a teepee, silhouettes of people huddled and content, while outside the sky danced with northern lights and the wind carried their song. This, he thought, is how we made it. Shelter, fire, kinship, faith, all interwoven to banish the deadly cold. He said a silent farewell to the valley that had cradled them through the winter. Then, with a light heart, he turned and followed his family and friends along the trail, leaving behind the austere beauty of the snow-laden cottonwoods for the promise of spring's renewal. Each footstep away from the winter camp was a step toward green grass and flowers, but each was also rooted in the strength gained during the long, cold nights. They owed thanks to many things: the buffalo whose hides made their teepees warm, the fire that gave heat and life, the protection of animal skins and stone, the healing power of herbs and steam, the strength of community, and the faith that the Great Spirit watched over them through the longest nights. Through blizzards, freezing nights, hunger, and healing, they had supported one another and upheld the wisdom of their ancestors. Every winter that would come in future years would find them ready. They would greet the snow and cold not with dread, but with a quiet confidence. Knowing how to build a sturdy lodge, how to line and bank it against the wind, how to kindle fire and song to fill the darkness, how to care for the vulnerable, and how to call upon the Spirit through prayer and ceremony to guide them. This knowledge, passed down through generations, was their armor and comfort. In the end, the secret to sleeping in teepees through deadly cold was no secret at all. It was the sum of many simple, profound things. A well-made teepee, a well-tended fire, the warm gifts of the buffalo, the resourcefulness of using heated stones and hides, the healing touch of traditional medicine, the unity of the people, and the abiding belief in a higher protection. Together, these meant the difference between life and death on the winter prairie. With these, they turned a frozen wilderness into a home and kept the spark of life glowing in the heart of winter. Epilogue. Generations of warmth. Many winters passed. Little Flower grew up, became a mother and then a grandmother. One calm winter night, in a much-changed world, she found herself sitting by a fire very much like the one from her childhood, with her own grandchildren clustered around. Outside the modern walls of their home, the wind was blowing snow across the moon, and the little ones felt a bit of that ancient chill. They asked their Unchi, grandmother, how the old-time Lakota had ever managed to live through such winters in Tipis. Little Flower, now known by her adult name, Winyan Chikala, little woman, though she would always be Little Flower in her heart, smiled, and her eyes sparkled in the firelight. She recognized the same curiosity and concern that she once had when she was small. Wrapping a warm quilt, one covered in star patterns that reminded her of the night sky, around the nearest child, she began to speak in a gentle, sing-song voice. Hekta chungwing yanke changna. She started in Lakota before continuing in English for the young ones. A long time ago, our people lived in Tipis through the coldest winters, and we did not freeze. No, we stayed warm and safe. Her grandchildren's eyes grew wide, and they snuggled closer, much as she had with her mother Bluebird and Grandma Whitefeather in that long-ago winter. How did you do it, Unchi? A little girl asked. Grandmother Little Flower leaned in, the fire casting a soft glow on her lined but peaceful face. We had everything we needed. We built our teepees strong from buffalo hides, so thick that the worst wind could barely sneak in. We kept a fire in the middle, always alive, like the heart of our home, and its heat made the lodge cozy as a robin's nest. We lined the walls with extra hides and cloth, trapping warm air inside. At night, we all slept together under big buffalo robes. Our bodies and those robes were like a pile of warm puppies keeping each other warm. The children giggled at the image of a puppy pile. Little Flower closed her eyes briefly, recalling the sweet smell of smoke and sage, the muffled laughter of relatives in nearby teepees, and the feeling of her mother's arms around her on a stormy night. We also used our good sense, she continued. We never let the fire go too low, and if it was very cold, someone would wake up to add wood or buffalo chips to keep it going. We heated rocks by the fire and put them by our feet when we slept. And oh, how nice that was, like a little sun under the blankets. The children listening stretched their toes, imagining hidden suns warming them. The boy next to Little Flower asked, "Weren't you ever afraid of blizzards?" She nodded slowly. Blizzards came, yes, but we were clever and prepared. When we knew a big storm was coming, we gathered extra wood and meat inside, we tied down our teepees extra tight, and then we sat together and told stories or sang songs to pass the time. We trusted our teepees to protect us, and they did. I remember one terrible storm when I was small. The wind howled like 100 wolves, but inside our lodge, my father told a funny story about Coyote, and my grandmother sang to me, and I actually fell asleep while the snow piled high outside. That's how safe and warm I felt. The children looked at each other in surprise. The idea of sleeping peacefully during a howling blizzard astonished them. The eldest grandchild, a girl on the cusp of her teens, had been learning some of the old language and ways. She spoke softly. It's because everyone worked together and believed in Wankatakia, the creator, huh, Unchi? Little Flower reached out and gently pinched the girl's cheek affectionately. Hang, yes, my dear. We survived because we had Ikche Wichasha, the common sense and endurance given by the Creator and taught by our ancestors. Another boy piped up, "Grandma, what if the food ran out? Weren't people hungry?" Little Flower's expression grew gentle. "It's true, winter could be lean," she said. "But we planned well. In the fall we dried plenty of meat and fruit. We made pemmican, buffalo meat pounded with berries and fat, and kept it in skin bags. That food lasted us all winter in small handfuls, and we knew how to find what we needed even in snow. We collected wild onions from riverbanks on warmer days, or we dug up prairie turnips from under the snow. Sometimes Men hunted rabbits or deer along the tree lines. We never feasted in winter, but we managed on little without starving. And when one family was low, others shared. Sometimes we all felt hunger, but we faced it together, singing songs to distract from empty bellies and telling the children, "Be patient, spring will come." She smiled at her grandchildren, and spring always came. We learned that if we take care of each other, we can get through anything, even hunger. We also had some surprises, she added, eyes twinkling. Now and then the Creator sent us a gift, like a stray buffalo wandering near camp just when our dried meat was almost gone. Then we thanked him with all our hearts as we filled our pots with fresh stew. Those miracles taught us to trust, that we wouldn't be abandoned. Grandmother Little Flower wrapped her arms around the little ones and continued, "We helped each other. If one lodge's fire went out, their neighbor would bring embers. If one family was low on food, others shared. We were never alone in the cold, and we prayed and gave thanks. Oh yes, even in the middle of winter, we thanked the Great Spirit for the beauty of the snow, for the lessons it taught us, and for the cozy tipis that were our nests." She gestured toward the window where the snow could be seen swirling beyond. Winter was, and is, a relative. He can be harsh, but he also brings us together. In our tipi, I felt closer to my family in winter than any other time, all of us huddled and heart to heart. I remember the glow of our small fire on my father's face, the shadows dancing on the hide walls, and I remember feeling not scared, but loved. The grandchildren were silent for a moment, taking in her words. Outside, the wind tapped a bare tree branch against the roof, making a gentle thump-thump rhythm. The youngest crawled into Little Flower's lap and yawned. "I wish I could have seen that," he murmured drowsily. Little Flower hugged him and chuckled. "Perhaps you have, little one. When we gather like this, with our family, telling stories on a snowy night, that is the spirit of what we did in the Tipis. The same heart keeps us warm." She looked around at all of them. "Never forget, our people found a way to live in harmony with even the hardest winter. We kept the fire of life alive. Inside those tipis, through our knowledge, our faith, and our love. And that fire, Thahunke, that fire burns in us still." A few minutes later, as Little Flower's grandchildren drifted off to sleep one by one, the grandmother carefully stood and placed another log on the modern stove's embers. The room glowed with a renewed warmth. She gazed out the window at the snow one last time before drawing the curtain. In her mind's eye, she could almost see a circle of tipis standing proudly in the moonlit snow, smoke rising from their tops. She could almost hear a distant lullaby carried on the wind from those days of old. With a grateful heart, the elder laid down among the little ones, much as her own family had done so long ago. As she closed her eyes, she whispered a familiar prayer in Lakota. "Pilamaya, wakang thanka, bluhiwakshto." Thank you, Great Spirit. I am forever grateful. The snow fell quietly outside, but inside, as always, the glow of love and memory kept the winter night at bay. And so, across generations, the story and the warmth live on. Hope chungwing yanke wangji ke lo. One winter lodge can hold a world of warmth.